Good morning. Welcome to the Angela Lee Show this morning, this Sunday morning. Nice bright Sunday morning. Just doing a tester before we start the show at 10 o'clock. How are you this morning? Good morning. And before I start the show, we just want to clear some unblocked energies that we have this morning. So join with me as we clear any unblocked energies that we have this morning. And we're going to be talking about the most heated debate that we've had this week, particularly in light with the Oscar drama, where we saw Will Smith hit or slap Chris Rock. And it's been the talk, hasn't it, of this week, and people are still talking about it. And I want to actually deal with the psychological aspects in terms of trauma recovery and the impact of trauma recovery. And particularly if you don't deal with your childhood traumas, then we're going to see it replay as we did with Will Smith at the Oscars last week. That's what we're talking about this morning. So join in the conversations this morning. And as I mentioned, I'm just wanting to clear some trauma that we are anyone experiencing this morning, particularly in terms of blocking any traumas and releasing it this morning. And so I'm just going to play that number again this morning. It's the Angela Lee Show. Good morning to you. And good morning, Facebook user, whoever's joining me this morning. Good morning. And I'm not going to be plugging the show as I always do. I'm just going to let it run and then I'll share it later. Whoever's going to join me is going to join me this morning, because I've got so much information that I want to share. And I'm mindful that I'm going to be starting at 10 o'clock this morning. And so let's take a deep breath in and breathe out this morning. Someone is saying, actually, perhaps I should share it. Let's take another deep breath in and breathe out this morning. Let's take another deep breath in and release this morning. And we're talking about childhood trauma, recovery, Will Smith drama, Oscars drama. That's what we're talking about this morning. And we're going to be giving some useful tips on how you can recover from your trauma. Because as you know, I'm a life coach, mental health specialist, and I want to offer some support and help this morning, because it's all good talking about it. But what I like to do is to also talk about it, but also provide solutions at the end of my show. So good morning to you. And I'm not going to spend time, tagging and whatever people this morning. If you want to join me, then do join me. And I will share the show later, because I know it's Sunday morning and I've got lots of information to give out this morning. And I just really want us to be focused on the information this morning. Just want us to be focused on the information this morning. Good morning to all of you that are joining me for the first time. Good morning to you this morning. And I'm just going to let this ride out this morning, doing some chakra cleanse and unblocking this morning. Just going to allow it to just take its full course. And do you want to take a deep breath with me this morning? And breathe out. Let's get rid of any trauma that we're experiencing this morning, any negative energy that we want to release this morning. Deep breath in as we inhale and exhale. And again, let's take a deep breath in. And exhale this morning. Good morning, Andre Freeman. Good morning. How are you doing? And let's take another deep breath in. And exhale this morning. And this morning we're talking about the Oscar fiasco, the assault or the attack by Will Smith against Chris Rock, his trauma triggers. We're talking about trauma recovery. And at the end of the show, as I mentioned, I want to offer solutions. I'm in for a good chat about what happened last week, but I'm also in for finding solutions as a life coach and a mental health specialist this morning. Welcome to the Angela Lee Show this morning. Hope you're doing well. And I'm just allowing some chakra cleansing to happen this morning before we start. So take a deep breath in. If you're listening on the airwaves, we're also going to be streaming live on Anchor FM, and I'll share the link with you later on YouTube channel, Facebook Live this morning. Good morning to you listeners out there. It's Angela Lee, and we're talking about trauma recovery in light with the drama that we saw last week that's kept everyone in the community talking this morning. Good morning to you. Just going to take one more deep breath in and breathe out this morning. One more deep breath in and exhale out this morning. Good morning to you. Wonderful. So good morning to you this morning. I hope you're doing good this morning. Hope you're doing well. I've had a great weekend so far. I had an amazing time Friday night, Saturday. It was great. And it's amazing because I was taken back to my past in an area that I used to live in London. And it was really interesting and refreshing seeing people from your past and how we have managed to grow, in light with our experience that we've had with each other, our interpersonal relationships. And it's great. And it's refreshing to see a healthy relationship between us. And it's also refreshing to see people have a great time, despite our maturity. That's all I'm gonna say in terms of that. I had a lovely weekend, and so welcome to the show this morning. And as I mentioned this morning, we're talking about recover or repeat, or repeat or recover. We can switch it, and I want to discuss particularly the event that happened last week with the Oscars, when Will Smith actually mentioned that I was brought back to my childhood. And that's his statement, or people can argue it's his excuse in terms of why he assaulted Chris Rock. He said he was actually brought back to his childhood. And we're going to explore that concept of being brought back to one's childhood through childhood trauma that some people have experienced, who tend to continue to have triggers or flashbacks due to unresolved issues. And so being brought back to your childhood is actually something that occurs if you have unresolved issues. And that's what we're talking about this morning. And so, as we know, before I start the show, I just want to do a couple of positive affirmations. And so wherever you're listening to me on the airways, I want you to just sit back on your chair or lying down, and let's repeat some positive affirmations in terms of trauma recovery. And let's take a deep breath in before we start. Inhale and exhale. And you can repeat it after me if you like. Okay. I am worthy. I am allowed to struggle. I am allowed to talk. I am not alone. What happens to me does not define me. What happened to me is not my fault. I deserve to take up space. I deserve to heal and move on. And that's our positive affirmations this morning. And before we start looking at or exploring what happened at the Oscars last week, let's explore what a healthy relationship looked like. Because I want to start on a positive note so that we are not delusionized in terms of what does that healthy relationship look like. And so a measure of a good relationship is how it encourages optimal intellect, emotional and spiritual growth. And so if you're in a relationship where it does not encourage intellect or emotional or spiritual growth, then you're not in a healthy relationship. A healthy relationship is primarily when two whole people give their whole selves in a union or in a relationship. And so you're not giving half of self, you're giving your whole complete self in a relationship. And so clearly we can see that both Will and Jada were not in or are not in a healthy relationship because they have not given their whole self, their whole complete healed self in their relationship. And what we've got in terms of how that looks like in their relationship, it plays out and becomes toxic. And so evidently, they both quoted on the red table that they're in a bad marriage for life. And I find that pronouncement quite scary, quite dangerous, quite toxic, quite damaging, particularly into that because they have their own children, and it's a negative pronouncement on a global platform such as her red table that you are in a bad marriage for life. Highly toxic. And it's sending out the wrong messages for those in toxic relationships that you have to remain in that toxic, bad marriage for life. It's sending out the complete wrong message, dangerous message, and that you have to remain in such a toxic relationship. Quite scary, quite unhealthy. And particularly as experts and researchers have suggested that psychological traumatic attacks, particularly abusive relationships, that is experienced prior to puberty and early years, have the potential to cause unusual amounts of stress to the individual, and it's also linked to dependency or abusive future types of relationships. And so that's quite a dangerous message to send out, that you're in a bad marriage for life. And I find that quite toxic. And so many people, as I mentioned, have been discussing the Will Smith and Jada's relationship. and particularly in light with their entanglement situation, and in light with that relationship that Jada was entangled with in 2020 with August, the R&B singer. And although in that conversation she actually discussed that, she was given, August actually mentioned that he was given permission to have that relationship. Jada, however, she retracted in her Red Table Talk, and she actually discussed or reiterated that she doesn't actually need that permission to enter such a relationship, or to be entangled, or to have an extramarital affair, particularly as it was, or she argued that they were having a rocky time in their marriage, and apparently they were separated. And I'm not sure if many of you have seen that Red Table discussion, but Will actually looked quite uncomfortable. And many people have argued that they believe that Jada is actually toxic, and that she's actually stripped away Will's masculinity, and that she is a narcissist. She's quite abusive, she's quite toxic. And many actually have gone to length to actually suggest that she's actually perhaps the man in the relationship, and that she is really sort of a person that seeks attention. She's quite manipulative, controlling, and in that Red Table Talk or in conversation, she dominates the conversation and she dominates the relationship. And so that's what people have suggested. And it's a suggestion. Good morning to those that are just joining me, and these greetings to you and all those that are joining me on the show this morning. We've got a lot of content to go through this morning because I really want to also find solutions. And so let's have a look at Jada's personality then, or her characteristics. And also we can actually look at Will's characteristics in parallel. And so what does an abuse or a narcissist look like? And so narcissist abuse is a type of emotional abuse where an abuser only cares about themselves. And they may use words to manipulate, or actions to manipulate, or emotional actions to manipulate their partner. And if you can remember at the Oscars, when Chris Rock was telling that joke, when he was sort of homing in on Jada's short haircut, which is as a result of a hair loss disease that she's experiencing, he was initially laughing at his joke. And it was not until Jada rolled her eyes and seemed to be somewhat displeased at his joke that Will Smith switched, or was triggered, or as he suggested, he was brought back to his childhood. And then what constituted after that is what we all saw when he walked on that stage in the Oscars and assaulted Chris Rock with a punch to his face and walked back to the stage. And it's quite alarming because like many people have been discussing, there was no security in terms of safeguarding Chris Rock, who was actually a host for the Oscars. And so there's lots of safeguarding issues that comes to light. And Will Smith goes back to his seat, and he then proceeds to continue to emotionally abuse Chris Rock by suggesting, or people are suggesting, that he was defending his wife, and he has every right to do so, by shouting out profanity as he was seated, and mentioning that he should take his I'm not going to swear, his effing wife's name out of his mouth. That was what he mentioned. And Lots of people have actually analysed Jada's behaviour whilst this drama was actually being played out at the Oscars, and many have actually suggested that she was actually smiling and that she was actually enjoying what she was actually seeing and what was being played out. And so people can have suggested that she's quite narcissistic because she manipulated Will at that point when she rolled her eyes, which triggered him to be brought back to his childhood and lashed out and assaulted Chris Rock. And so what did that look like in terms of being brought back to his childhood? What does that mean, essentially? And so Will mentioned that during his childhood, he witnessed his dad, his father, beating up his mother. They were in a domestic violent marriage. And until today, he feels a sense of guilt and shame because whilst his mom was getting assaulted by his father when he was a child, he did nothing. And he feels a sense of guilt and shame because as a child, he did nothing. And in fact, what happened invariably at that time as a child, he was in a flight or fight situation and he chose to freeze as a child. And I think it's quite understandable. It's a natural response, and particularly when someone experiences trauma. And I don't think that Will Smith should actually hold himself hostage because of that situation, because he was a child, he was a mere child. However, because he has not done the work, the inner work, the shadow work, which he has actually apparently suggested that he's actually going to be doing some trauma work to sort of deal with his childhood issues. And that's why he actually still feels responsible for not supporting his mother. Greetings to you, Carl. And Carl is suggesting that perhaps Will is also abusive. And we're going to explore that into more details. And so, because Will hasn't done his work, he allowed himself to be triggered. He allowed himself to be brought back to his childhood, as he's mentioned on many occasions. He's made that statement. And so he was triggered and assaulted Chris Rock. Now, Jada has mentioned time and time again that she did not want to get married. And she did not even believe in a conventional marriage. And particularly because it was not actually modeled to her during her childhood, but she felt compelled to do so because she felt pregnant in their relationship and she felt pressured, by her family. And so clearly we can actually see how toxic the early beginnings of their relationship is, because we have Will Smith, who has not recovered from his traumatic relationship in terms of the abusive experiences that he witnessed with his parents. And then we have Jada, who is not happy, who doesn't believe in marriage, in conventional marriage, because it wasn't modeled to her. And she felt compelled to get married. And apparently it's been alleged that she cried all her way to the altar. And I just want to make a statement as a life coach and as a mental health specialist that this is not a healthy relationship. If you're crying all your way to the altar, if you're traumatized, if you're not happy to get married, and and it's not healthy for you, then that's not a healthy relationship. That's not the beginning of a healthy relationship. That's not the beginning of a healthy, sustainable marriage. And so, in fact, many people assume that she's actually still in love with Tupac. And apparently there was a letter that was written by her daughter, who believes that Tupac is still alive. And she's suggesting that Tupac should return because her mom is not happy. And so clearly we can see there are two individuals that have entered a union, a marriage, not with their whole complete self, but with their traumatic self. And these are clear risk factors for a toxic marriage or for an abusive relationship. So this morning, we're talking about toxic relationships. We're talking about the Jada fiasco, the situationship that they're in with people inside and outside their marriage, and the importance of recovering from your trauma or from your childhood trauma, your backstory, before you embark in a relationship. And I am talking from experience, having experienced toxic relationships. I mean, my parents got divorced because of a toxic relationship, and as a result of that, during my journey, I played out those toxic relationships because of my parents' trauma that was transferred onto me, or that was projected onto me, subconsciously or unsubconsciously. And because I was not aware at the time, and I did not do that shadow and inner work, I started to mirror or to play out or manifest my parents' trauma onto my own life and onto other relationships. And many people out there find themselves in karmic relationships because of what was projected, or because of what they've experienced in their childhood, and they were perhaps not aware of it, and they did not do that inner work. And so this morning, that's what we're talking about this morning. Good morning to you this morning. For those that are listening for the first time, we're talking about repeat or recover, because if we fail to recover, we will inevitably repeat that karmic cycle until we learn the lesson that we need to learn. So it's so important for us to recover. I'm going to see you in a bit. I want to play a number, and I'm going to see you in a moment. We're talking about traumatic relationships this morning in light of Jada and Will Smith's relationship this morning. So join in the conversation this morning as we talk some real talk about abusive relationship. And it's all good, as I mentioned, to talk about it, but we're finding solutions as well.
I am the moonrise, I am the night, I am the stars.
Join in the conversations this morning.
My body is of the earth, and my spirit knows how to fly.
Good morning for you that's joining me for the first time this morning. We're talking about repeat or recover, and we're talking about this in light of what we witnessed during the Oscars with the attack or the assault on Chris Rock this morning. So important for us to recover from our traumatic experience. Otherwise, we're going to repeat it. We're going to repeat the cycles this morning.
Carrying and sharing this love inside.
Repeat or recover this morning. Thank you, Anise, for that. So this morning, if you're in a toxic relationship, so important for you to do the inner work, to recover. Otherwise, we're going to see it play out in your adult relationships, in interpersonal relationships, in fact. We're going to see it play out. So join me this morning as we talk about relationships this morning.
I am the stars in the sky.
Good morning to you. This is the Angela Lee Show, and we're talking about repeating or recovering from your childhood trauma in light of the Oscars drama, where we saw Will Smith and Jada and Chris Rock being assaulted due to Will Smith mentioning that he was brought back to his childhood.
Bodies of the earth and my spirit knows how to fly, to turn through the cycles of my life. Carrying and sharing this love.
Important for us to break the cycles that we've inherited.
I am the light.
Very important.
I am the moonrise. I am the night. I am the stars in the sky. My bodies of the earth and my spirit knows how to fly, to turn through the.
Good morning to you if you're joining me for the first time. It's Angela Lee this morning. Great. We're going to continue. Just play that lovely number for you. We're going to continue our conversations. And good morning to you, Anise. And she has mentioned, yes, a healthy relationship motivates you. It's a journey of growth, self-discovery, and self-awareness. Absolutely. And for those of you that are joining me for the first time, we're discussing the situation regarding Will Smith and Jada, and also the assault on Chris Rock this morning, which has created a storm within the global world who witnessed it. And as I mentioned, there's lots of safeguarding issues that has actually come to light where there was no support or protection for Chris Rock. And many comedians out there are quite outraged because they're sort of thinking, when they're out there doing their craft, they don't want to be attacked or assaulted when they're doing their art. And so lots of safeguarding issues have come to light as well. And I know that currently the Oscars management board are actually sort of discussing and reviewing. And within a fortnight from now, they're going to be trying to find a resolution on how they're going to be sanctioning Will Smith, because obviously he needs to be sanctioned. A message needs to be sent out there that actually you can't just go on stage and assault anyone. And just to put it out there, Will Smith has actually apologized. He has actually apologized about his behavior. He said it was unacceptable, and that he was actually brought back to his childhood. He was triggered, and he's going to get the help. And so for those people that are out there that are supporting Will Smith for that attack, it's actually not acceptable to actually go out there and assault people. Vernon Pithen, good morning. If you were at a place of work, let's look at a scenario. If you were at a place of work and you had a colleague that was telling a joke on you, whether it was intentional or not, you can't actually lash out at your colleague or attack your colleague. And I was mentioning it in a discussion. I mean, I've got short hair. I've decided to cut my hair short. And although I've done this 3 times, but this last time where I have actually decided to cut my hair was due to being diagnosed with a brain tumor a decade ago. And I had hair loss, which was attributed because of a toxic marriage at the time that I was in, and I decided to leave. I have also been jibed at. People have taken jibes about my hair being short. As a teaching practitioner, people have taken jibes at me. Students have taken jibes at me, but at no point have I lashed out or have I been propelled to attack anyone because of the jibes that have been, put out against me. I have chosen to educate. And I remember the student looking at me and they mentioned, thank you, Cash. She said, my hair looks amazing. I'm going to put your message out in the morning in a minute. And a student, they were laughing at my hair, they were talking and jibing and laughing at my hair. And one of the students sort of, in a jibe, patronizing way, asked me, Miss, why is your hair short? And I actually decided to educate that student, and I shared a personal situation with them. And I said, actually, I was diagnosed with a brain tumor a decade ago, and I decided to, and I lost some of my hair, and I decided to shave my hair. And because I was honest with him, and I shared a personal story, which I didn't have to, the students really appreciate it. And I don't get any more jibes from them because they know why my hair is this short. And so, in life, we need to educate people. We don't have to take things too personally in terms of, whether people are attacking us about our hair. We don't have to take things personally. We can choose to take the high road in terms of our higher self and educate. We can educate people, and that's what we're talking about this morning. Kaz, Kaz is mentioning. Oh, I hope you can still see me because my I hope you can still see me. Let me know if you can still see me on Facebook Live because my phone ain't working and I'm trying to monitor it and it's not working. So let me know if you can still see me. Can you send me a message if it's still streaming on Facebook Live? Let me know. Okay, I'm going to continue. And so Kaz is saying Jada also represents a strong united front when in fact she is damaged. Okay, let's put that for what Kaz has mentioned. Okay, Anisa said we can. Thank you. And so Jada also represents a strong united front when in fact she is damaged. She's a damaged soul. Will has not come from a grounded background either, who became successful very quickly. Jada, I believe, was and still is envious of him and his works on emasculating his self-worth. He is still always looking for validation from her. Absolutely. And we spoke about that. Thank you, Anise and Vernon. And thank you, Cass, for that contribution. And absolutely. And we mentioned at the beginning of the show that both of them did not enter the relationship with their complete whole self. We've got Jada, who did not want to get married, who a healthy relationship wasn't modeled to her. So she believes that the way she behaves is quite normal. She believes that's a normal relationship. She has normalized her behavior based on what was modeled to her during her childhood. And then you have Will Smith, who had an adverse childhood experience, and in the sense that he witnessed his parents in a domestic violent relationship. And he's mentioned that, in his adult life, he still feels a sense of guilt for freezing, where as a child, he had a fight and flight moment and he froze and he chose not to support or help his mother. And that's normal. If a flight and fright moment is normal for you to freeze when you witness something traumatic. And we're going to explore that flight and flight scenario in a minute. Thank you, Kaz, for your contributions. Kaz has also commented, and she said, I question whether Jada is being honest about her diagnosis. She's always looking for the limelight, and I don't mean that to be negative about her. The question is quite authentic, and I totally agree with you as well. I totally agree with you. And so because people have mentioned that she's quite narcissistic in terms of her behavior, also always attention seeking, and she has a bit of jealousy, as many people have mentioned, because she also mentioned how she was upset that she had children. She wasn't happy when she had her kids, and she felt that her kids impacted on her career. And so she could actually be quite resentful, as Kaz mentioned earlier on, in terms of how her husband, Will Smith's career has progressed and continues to progress. And so she feels a sense of resentment. I just want to touch on that fight and flight situation. And what does that look like? And so if you are compelled to a fight and flight situation, and usually this is actually faced when you're facing a threat. And we tend to automatically respond in two ways, either fight or flight. Now, trauma lies on a continuum, but it's always about a fight or flight freeze response. And when we are faced with a threat, a message is sent to the amygdala, or the limbic system of the brain, the amygdala accesses the threat and sends a message to the brainstem to activate that fight, flight, or freeze response. And so Will Smith should not hold himself hostage for freezing. It's a normal response in terms of the limbic system of the brain when you are actually experiencing a trauma. So it's a normal response, and so he should not hold himself hostage for experiencing that. And I remembered when my mother was also when I witnessed and I experienced abuse, and I could hear my mother being hit when I was a young child, I froze. And so I can actually equally respond to that. I did not, run upstairs to help or support her. I was terrified, I was petrified, and I froze. And so when children are experiencing trauma, their brains begin to change to a primitive fight, flight, or freeze response. And so it's a natural response. And so while the brain is in that primitive response mode, it shuts down completely. And areas of your brain shuts down and where learning occurs. And particularly learning that involves language, which is why it is equally dangerous for children to go through this process during this critical type of development, during this brain development, usually before the age of 7 years of age. Now, research further suggests that trauma and life stresses, for example, experiencing bereavement or divorce, are key predictors in terms of that neuro or that hormonal HPA access in terms of that brain activity, particularly gene expression. And it's linked to that prefrontal cortex in our brain. And quite alarmingly, it is actually the development of what we see play out now in terms of our adolescence or adulthood, where addiction is developed. And so you have people who have experienced overwhelming trauma. They tend to be more activated in terms of that fight and flight syndrome, particularly hypervigilance kicks in more often than it should. And so could it be argued that at that time where Will saw his wife rolling his eyes, that hypervigilant, that brain activity that has not been developed properly because he experienced that childhood trauma during his childhood, that he lashed out in that way because he mentioned that he was brought back to his childhood. We're talking about repeat or recover this morning, and it's quite intense, it's quite detailed. And if you don't understand what happens to that child that goes through that trauma, it's so quick for us to judge or to point a finger. It's so quick for us to do that. It's so quick for us to judge and to point a finger. And so this morning, we're talking about the situation that has evolved in terms of that Oscar drama where Will Smith lashed out on Chris Rock, and he's mentioned that he was brought back to his childhood and that he has now admitted that it was something that he should not have done. He feels embarrassed, and he said he's going to actually seek support, seek help through a therapist so that he can actually do that shadow work that he should have actually perhaps done before he entered his marriage or that union that he has, particularly because he was triggered, he had a flashback, he said he was brought back to his childhood, which was why he lashed out. It was why he lashed out at Chris Rock. And as I mentioned, many people are now looking at the dynamics of that relationship in terms of Jada's position. And so we've already determined what a healthy relationship looked like. And so it's so important that when you enter a reunion or a relationship, that you enter with your whole complete self, and that you do that inner work, and that you do that shadow work, and that you sort out the business of your childhood, the trauma of your childhood, before you embark on a relationship. Because if you do not do that, it's going to play out in your adult life. You're going to repeat the trauma of your childhood. And so when people you tend to act in rage or anger, it's due to a repressed emotions or feelings of not being listened to or heard. However, the more healthy approach is to learn and discover with that support from a therapist. And as I mentioned, Will Smith has admittedly mentioned that he's actually going to seek therapy. Good morning to you, Neville. He said you're just tuning in. Good morning to you this morning. And so let's have a look at what a narcissist look like. We've mentioned they're attention seekers. They want the limelight all the time. They don't take accountability for their behavior, and they think they're always right. And so let's have a look at what a narcissist look like. Let's have a look. And so if you're in an abusive relationship with a narcissist, I just want to look at that quickly. These are some of the things I want to point out. And I want to draw parallel in light with Will and Jada's relationship or marriage, open marriage, as it were. And so you are afraid of your partner. So it's been suggested that Will is actually afraid of Jada. You are constantly walking on eggshells because of his mood swings. And so Jada rolled her eyes. And so Will Smith is triggered, and he's thinking, oh my God. And people are suggesting that he felt compelled to react the way he reacted because he knows that when he goes back home, she's going to go in one of her mood swings and he's going to be constantly walking on eggshells, and he does not even know what he's going to expect when he goes home. And so he had to, at that time, he thought that he was manning up. So you spend your time working out what kind of mood that person is in. And you're always constantly focusing on their needs. And so instead of focusing on your needs, you're focusing on their needs. And as I mentioned, you've got this hyper vigilant characteristics that kicks in your brain limbic system, because you have actually experienced a traumatic childhood, and so you need to do the inner work. And so that person that's in an abusive relationship, he loses his temper easily to minor things. And people are suggesting that was just a minor joke, that it did not actually constitute an assault. It was minor. And so if you're in an abusive relationship, minor things are escalated out of control. And usually if you're in that toxic, abusive relationship, your partner has equally been in an abusive previous relationship. And as we mentioned, Jada has mentioned that she has not had a good model, a good relationship model to her, which is why she doesn't actually believe in a conventional marriage. And she has normalized her open relationship. And so that when you have problems in your relationship, whether it's in a marriage or in a partnership, you should step out of that relationship. Because she said that when she actually had that intimate relationship with August, she felt loved, she felt wanted, she felt excited. And so that's alarm bells. And so she's actually putting it out there on the global stage that when you are experiencing a troubled or a challenging relationship, you should step out of that marriage and look externally for someone to actually cater for your needs. that is, sorry, I'm not even going to apologize. That is a toxic, wrong advice. And so I just want to go through a couple of things in terms of what does that narcissistic or that abusive relation look like, and I'm making some parallels in light with Jada and Will's relationship. So that person, he or she's jealous, and they usually accuse you of flirting or having affairs. He or she regularly criticizes you, undermines you in front of people, including the way you look or the way you dress, and your abilities as a man or as a woman. Your needs are considered less important, or actually they're ignored, and they tend to make the decisions in the relationship. And we can see that played out in Jada and Will Smith's relationship. You find it hard to get time on your own when you spend time away from him or her, and the demands are unrealistic. He or she forces you to do something that you don't really want to do. Perhaps you're forced to have sex with other people. And as we've mentioned, they step out of their marriage, they step out of their union, they have an open marriage, and they force you to participate in sexual activities that you're uncomfortable with. And we can actually see that Will Smith does not actually believe in that unconventional relationship. He does not actually believe in that unconventional relationship. Now, Waygard Chambers, welcome to the show, and thank you for your contributions. He's mentioned that Will Smith may have assaulted Chris physically by Chris first assaulting his wife verbally. We've already discussed that, yeah, at the beginning of the show. He was actually triggered. He was brought back to his childhood because of his childhood trauma that has not been dealt with. Kaz has mentioned that I grew up in Peckham, and I experienced watching a racist white neighbour beat a black family to death. My God, Kaz, really? They survived, but the father was beaten with poles. To this day, I remember the father screaming. I was 7 years old. I recently went to Thailand where I was racially abused. I lost it, had a massive fight in Bangkok, and I was not drunk. My whole holiday was spoilt, and I went to counselling, and I was told that I have post-traumatic stress disorder, and I was triggered in that moment. Ordinarily, I would have sense not to. Absolutely. And that's an example. That is, thank you for sharing that. Absolutely. It's totally relevant. And thank you for sharing that, Kaz, because that is exactly what we're talking about this morning. That if you've experienced a traumatic event, absolutely relevant. If you've experienced a traumatic event, if you've witnessed it, and it's not been dealt with, then it's going to play out in your adult life. And I'm happy that you went to counselling, Kaz, and that you got the correct diagnosis. And so perhaps I'm of the belief that both Will and Smith they've got some mental health disorders here, toxic mental health disorders based on both of their childhood experiences, because that behavior or their behavior is not normal. And so we've mentioned a couple of things in terms of what does that abusive relationship look like. We've mentioned a couple of things. And as I mentioned, that Will has already admitted that he had a fight and flight moment where he froze, and he continuously blames himself for that, and he should not hold himself hostage to that situation, because as I mentioned, that it's a brain activity that happens, that activates in a normal process of someone experiencing trauma. Anisa is saying, yes, toxicity is when someone is forever jumping through hoops to please the other person, constantly seeking their approval, validation, that is always drama and attached issues. Absolutely. So if you're in a relationship that is fueled with drama, then it's a red flag situation, and it's time for you to leave in order to save not only yourself, but to save your children from experiencing a similar thing, because it's going to be played out in your children. The longer you remain in a toxic relationship, it's going to be played out in your children. And we're going to discuss that and explore that in a minute. And so trauma is an emotional response to a terrible event like an accident, rape, or natural disaster. And immediately after the event, shock and denial are typical. Long-term reactions include unpredictable emotions, flashbacks, strained relationships, and even physical symptoms, headaches, nausea, and that is taken from the Medical Psychological Association. And so that is the definition of trauma. And so it can actually impact on not only your mental health, your physical health, but also equally your emotional health. And there are three types of trauma. There's acute trauma, there's chronic, or there's complex trauma. Now, acute trauma results from a single incident. However, chronic trauma is repeated and prolonged, such as domestic violence or abuse. And the symptoms, as we mentioned, can actually include low self-worth, post-traumatic stress disorder, which Kaz has shared with us, depression, bipolar, borderline personality disorder, narcissistic borderline personality disorder, and it could actually lead to self-harming. Complex trauma, on the other hand, is its exposure to a varied, multiple traumatic events, often of an invasive interpersonal nature. And the symptoms also are quite similar to those that have experienced chronic trauma, in that you can also experience post-traumatic stress disorder, bipolar, borderline personality disorder, narcissist, borderline personality disorder, or depression. And so if you continue to remain in a toxic marriage, or if you haven't done your childhood work, your shadow work, it's going to lead to mental illness. It's going to lead to mental illness, whether we want to believe it or not. It's going to lead to that, because that's what research experts have found. Now, due to a lack of attachment needs during childhood with a caregiver, individuals develop dependency needs. And perhaps Will Smith has developed this dependency need to Jada, that although the relationship is toxic, he still feels compelled to remain in that toxic relationship, as they both quoted Bad Marriage for Life, because his attachment needs when he was a child was forfeited. And it can be detrimental in terms of forging interpersonal healthy relationships in adult life, which we can see played out. And sufficient evidence has also suggested that childhood trauma compromises, and we've mentioned the brain activity, the in the prefrontal cortex, the neurostructure and the function. They are key predictors that leads to an individual being susceptible to later cognitive deficiencies and also psychiatric illnesses such as schizophrenia, depression, bipolar, and we've mentioned the others. And so if you haven't dealt with your unfinished business of your childhood, you're going to be attracted to someone that's quite similar, which is why Jada and Will are attracted to each other, which is a karmic relationship. And that karmic relationship has arrived because both of you need to learn the lessons. It's there to teach you something. And it appears that Jada and Will have not learned that lesson, because it should teach you how to grow. It should teach you how to love yourself, to value yourself, your self-worth. And if you fail to learn that lesson, you're going to be in a constant karmic cycle, which is what Will Smith has found himself in. They're in a karmic cycle relationship. They can't seem to get off that karmic wheel because they have made the declaration that they're in this bad marriage for life, which is unhealthy. Totally unhealthy. This morning we're talking about repeat or recover. So important for us to do that inner shadow work. And it doesn't matter how ugly it looks like. And admittedly, you can't do that inner shadow work on your own. You need to employ a therapist. You need to employ a counselor. And as I mentioned my story, I've shared my personal journey with you. And I mentioned that, like similar to Kaz, similar to many people that have done their inner and shadow work, we have actually employed the experts to help us in our journey. And if you do not do that work, as I mentioned, you're just going to be on that karmic cycle. And so we mentioned that these people have unrealistic expectations. If you're in this karmic relationship, they deny things, they gaslight, they trivialize, or they explode things. They use guilt, manipulation. They blame you for the problem. They do not take responsibility or accountability for their behavior. They destroy, they deny. If you're in a toxic relationship this morning, you need to leave in order to not only safeguard yourself, but to safeguard your children. And experts have also suggested, they have suggested that if you've experienced a traumatic event in your life, then you're more susceptible. You're a risk, it's a risk factor for you to either become addictive to either substance abuse or relationship dependency in your adult life, if you've actually experienced it in your childhood. And so if you're a parent, like me, I remained in my toxic marriage for 20 years thinking that, okay, do you know what? I don't want my kids to be without a father, not realizing that I was in a toxic marriage until I left that marriage. And I had counseling and I had therapy and cognitive therapy. And I was also reading books because I'm a bookworm. I enjoy reading books. I'm into personal and transformational development, which is why I became a life coach. And I'm also a mental health specialist. As many of you know, I actually do my master's in mental health and psychology. And it's actually opened up a whole revelation or a manifestation of what an unhealthy relationship look like, and the pitfalls and the red flags that you should not deny, because the impact is detrimental to your children, because they inherit those genes. Those genes are transferable to your children. They inherit these genes. And sometimes, people who, or young people, or early in their childhood that have experienced that, in their adult life now, it's impacted them enormously that they don't even know who they are. They are hypervigilant. They struggle with mental health illnesses. And many of these illnesses are not being diagnosed because they have not actually sought help, because they're embarrassed, or they're not even aware of it, because they've normalized their behavior. They believe their behavior is normalized, is normal, like Jada and Will alike, and many others. And so they carry on thinking that their behavior is normal, thinking that this marriage is normal, thinking that this relationship is normal, when it's toxic, and it's creating a devastating impact for your children, for the generations after you, because they've inherited your genes, that's been transferred. And experts have suggested that negative life events and particularly those that are experienced prior to puberty and early life, have the potential to cause unusual amount of stress to the individual and are key risk factors in terms of being associated with the early inception of drinking in adolescence and alcohol dependency in early childhood. And as we know, there is a mental health epidemic out there where we've seen young people, adults being dependent on alcohol and drink, on addict or have addictive behaviors. And many of those experts and researchers have suggested, have concluded that it's as a result of our childhood traumas, unresolved issues. So we're on this karmic cycle, this karmic wheel. Now, I want to share something with you even further, because as you know, I like to keep it really real on the show, because there's people out there that's actually struggling, and there's people that is actually being really honest on the thread this morning. And as we know, sometimes the communities where we derive from, we've been taught that we should not discuss our business, we should not air our dirty linen in public, and which is to the detriment of our mental health. And Kaz is saying, to be honest, I've always believed that Will Smith lacks real intelligence. He has become successful for being funny and in the right place at the right time. And in this situation, I'm not letting him get away with his actions. If Chris made a joke about Jada sleeping with August, I would have possibly accepted it, but it was a simple joke, in fact, a compliment. This was a slap in the face of history and an insult on all Black actors that have worked so hard to pave their way, the Sydney Potters, etc. Totally agree. And in fact, what people have actually mentioned, Kaz, is that it's setting a wrong message out there that, we know that Black actors, or as members of people of colour, they struggle anyway in terms of their representation. There's always a negative connotation associated to either you are an angry Black man or an angry Black woman. And what Will Smith did that day in terms of the Oscars, he actually warmed up to that idea that they already have on people of colour. And Isa is saying, yes, toxicity is when someone is forever jumping over hoops to please the other person. Absolutely, we've mentioned that. Good morning, Gaffer Blue. How are you doing? And Anisa said, yes, attachment styles derive from child behaviour patterns, parent givers, behaviour patterns, and subsequently this forms an attachment style in adult life, healthy or unhealthy relationships. Great show and information, Angela. Thank you very much. Thank you. And so, yeah, if our attachment styles have not been developed properly during childhood, where our caregiver was unable to give us that care that we need, then it has a catastrophic impact on us when we become adults, because then we attract relationships where we become dependable on that person for our self-worth, for our self-love, and we remain in that toxic relationship because we think it's normal, because it's what we used to. And as Jada has mentioned, she doesn't believe in the conventional marriage. She believes in stepping out of her marriage because it's not been modeled to her. She's mentioned that she cried on her way to the altar. So obviously it's not normal. She's not in a healthy relationship. She's not actually in a healthy state of mind. They both have entered or embarked on their relationship being completely on hold. And, as a life coach and as a mental health expert, I would suggest that both of them equally need to do shadow and inner work, and their children. It's not normal. It is not normal. Kaz has mentioned that Chris Rock was hurt in so many levels. And for those people in our community who are out there saying that, yeah, do you know what? Will Smith did a good job. He was protecting his woman. You know, and then earlier on, initially, Will Smith was making a joke in terms of, yeah, this is how we Philly do and people from Baltimore do. This is what we do. You can't take people from Philly and Baltimore anywhere, making light of a terrible incident, making light of an assault. And as I mentioned, if you were in a place of work and you assaulted someone, you would get the sack. And in fact, people can actually press charges. You can actually be arrested. You can't just go around in society and knock people out because people have taken a jibe at you. You can actually be arrested. It's a criminal offense to attack anyone. It's an assault. And so people out there that are normalizing this behavior, you really need to check yourself. That's not normal to lash out and attack people who are just doing a simple jibe. And as I mentioned, and as Kaz mentioned, he was talking about the relationship with August, which apparently he gave permission or did not have permission, because they have an open relationship where they step in and step out of relationships. They invite people in and out of relationships, which is, I believe, is extremely toxic, because he doesn't believe in divorce. He's dependent. He's in a dependent relationship. He's seeking validation from Jada. It's highly toxic. And I'm actually quite scared and petrified for his children. It's going to be quite shocking what's going to be played out in his children's life. And we've seen already early stages of what's been played out already with their kids, because Will Smith and Jada have they've transferred their genes onto their children. And so they've automatically inherited that. And unless they invariably do their inner and shadow work, it's going to be repeat and a karmic cycle situation. Kaz is saying we need to acknowledge our own childhood issues and do the work. And to be honest, my first boyfriend came from a stable background, and I gave home so much hell because I was damaged soul and I didn't know it at the time. And we are now together now, but I have so much respect for him for trying to understand me and support me. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that personal note, Kaz. And as I mentioned, I shared my personal note as well. And what I've discovered in my experience, what I've also discovered is that, my ex-husbands, ex-partners, I've equally attracted similar people like Jada and Will Smith, because at the time I didn't do my inner work. Similar to Kaz, I wasn't even aware of it. And so I was on this karmic cycle, continuously attracting the same sort of people. And what I've noticed about my ex-partners, they also had childhood experiences, adverse childhood experiences, which explains why they were behaving the way they are. Many of them had borderline personality disorder, narcissistic borderline personality disorder. And I also discovered, similar to Kaz, that I was struggling with post-traumatic stress disorder. It was undiagnosed because I was highly vigilant, highly triggered. And so it's important for you to do your own inner work, as Kaz has already suggested, as mentioned, experts suggest it. You've got to take accountable for your own work. You can't continue to play the blame game. Many of us have had an adverse childhood experience. A few of us have been brought with a spoon in their mouths. Many of us have been traumatized with a variety of colourful events. And many of us are not to blame for what we've experienced. However, when you become an adult, it's your responsibility to do the work. Because if you fail to do the work, it's absolutely dangerous for your children and for the generations to come if you fail to do the work. And so we're all victims here. We can't play the blame game. We're all victims here, victims of our adverse childhood experiences. There's too much resources out there for you to remain stuck. There's too many experts and life coaches and therapists and counselors out there for you to remain stuck. And so this morning, I just want to encourage you, whether you are a victim or whether you are the abuser, seek the help that you need to break that karmic cycle. Ask yourself the question, am I going to repeat this for my future generations, or am I going to recover? And it takes courage for someone like the likes of myself and Kaz and many more people that are listening on the airwaves. It takes courage for you. It takes courage for you to do the work. It takes courage. Kaz is saying we need to encourage our black men to seek help also. Absolutely. We need to encourage people of colour. We are the most community that have high levels of mental illness. And it's because we continue to suppress our feelings. We continue to remain stuck. And so, we need to start talking. We need to start normalizing this conversation about toxic relationships, abusive relationships, that it's not normal. It's not normal to walk on eggshells. It's not normal to remain in a toxic relationship. I left it. Many people have left toxic relationships, and it was my savior. And I mentioned on many shows, my panic attack stopped when I ended my first marriage. I've listened to my intuition. I've listened to my inner voice. I've listened to how people make me feel. So important for us to be self-aware and not get caught up with the hype of being infatuated in a relationship that does not make us feel good about ourselves, that does not contribute to our growth, our emotional, our spiritual growth, our intellect. We are far too grown to remain in this toxic cycle. We need to take action this morning. Just want to play a little number again.
Everything I touch, I'm grateful for where I am and who I have become.
I read something amazing to you. You're listening to the Angelique Show. I want to share something that I was asked to write in my master's course in terms of transformation after this number, because I managed to transform my life. I managed to recover. I managed to recover. I was coming from a toxic childhood where my parents were divorced. They were involved in a domestic violence marriage. I managed to recover because I did the work. I managed to recover. Jada and Will need to recover. However, the impact is enormous on our children. I've seen it played out even in my own children's life. The impact is enormous if you remain in that toxic marriage, in that toxic relationship. The impact is enormous on your children. Save our children, save the next generation, and leave that toxic relationship. Leave that toxic marriage. If not for yourself, for your children, for the next generation, because the impact is absolutely enormous. It's detrimental. We've got no excuse. We've got no excuse to remain in that toxic relationship this morning. You've got no excuse.
Focused on my growth and my mental health. I deserve respect and devotion, 'cause there's no replication. trust yourself. You know yourself. No reason why you should doubt yourself. Intuition.
We need to listen to our intuition, the inner man. How people make us feel this morning. We need to listen to that intuition this morning and not disregard our feelings because we are dependent on a relationship. How does that person make you feel? Absolutely, Kaz. Absolutely.
You are a source of love.
Being in a toxic family is also detrimental. You know my story. Toxic families are detrimental to our mental health. We need to protect ourselves. We really need to protect ourselves this morning. And that's what we're talking about this morning. I just want to share something this morning. I was asked by my lecturer, as you know, I'm doing a master's in psychology and mental health, and I was asked my problem-based learning question to answer this question in terms of what transformation means. And I just want to share what I've written, what I shared with my students and my lecturer on what transformation means, and I want to share it with you this morning because I managed to transform my life despite my childhood experience. Just want to share that with you this morning. And so, transformation for me means a complete rebirth, a mindset shift, being mindful, self-conscious, reflective of self, of old systems that no longer serve you, growth, die into the old self, habits and patterns, be it ancestral, archetypal, generational cycles, family systems, or what is considered the norm, re-emerging from the ashes of perhaps a divorce, change of career, new job, change of location, change of city, country, or even buying a new home. The absolute courage to put or finally put yourself first on your priority list, fighting for your happiness, to embrace the ultimate self-love, self-acceptance, the right to personal autonomy, the right to exist. The right to exist, the right to make your own choices and to lead your life the way you want to lead it, irrespective of the naysayers, which also includes family members. The ability to rock the boat if necessary, to confront and to express and not repress your feelings. And sometimes we're living in a world where even within our families, we don't want to rock the boat. We don't want to bring up past abuse or what we've experienced. Telling people what you want and expect from them, not people pleasing anymore. Being able to walk alone if necessary. Being fueled with confidence, saying no without apology, without seeking validation. In fact, you're validating self. Knowing that you are enough. You're okay despite your struggles, despite your adverse childhood experiences. Thus not allowing people to hold you hostage to your past. And so, Will Smith, don't allow yourself to be held hostage to your past. People out there that experience childhood adverse experiences, don't allow yourselves to be hostage to your past. If you experience abuse, be it emotional, domestic, or sexual abuse, don't allow yourselves to be held hostage to your past. The outright refusal to caretake, to rescue, to enable, leaving people, including members of your own family, to learn to take care of themselves and to finally make their own choices. The ability to bounce back and learn from your past experiences and to make new choices, daring to take that risk into the unknown. And so transformation ultimately means, for me, a spiritual journey, mind, body, and soul, becoming one with nature, the universe, being intuitive, practicing mindfulness, being attuned to self, trusting and allowing your inner voice to guide you. So this morning, if you're listening to the show, and Anisa saying, yes, building a platform for Black men in collaboration and celebration of Black men, etc., to talk. And I know that Anise does a show in terms of that. Yes, we need to encourage all Black men. I've got Black men in my family, Black friends, whether irrespective of colour, but particularly in the Black community where we've seen high levels of mental health issues, we need to encourage them to talk. That it's okay. Yeah, we get it. You've been through a traumatic experience. Yeah. So have I. We all have. But guess what? It's now time to heal. It's now time to recover. Reach out for support. Reach out for that help that you need. Kaz is saying to have the strength to remove them from your life and love them from afar. Teach toxic family members how to respect you by respecting yourself. Absolutely, Kaz. And I have had to do that. If your toxic family is not adding to your mental health and your well-being and not making you feel good about yourself or propelling unrealistic expectations, then you need to let them go. And as Kaz has mentioned, you need to love them from afar. Because if you continue to let people sort of railroad you, disrespect you constantly, you're not respecting yourself. And no wonder they don't respect you, because you don't respect yourself. You need to set boundaries, healthy boundaries to family members too, that actually, hell no, that's how far you're going to go with me. Actually, I respect myself. Actually, no. And be confident and comfortable saying no. Remove yourself from being a caretaker, a rescuer, and an enabler, which is an unhealthy form of helping, because they don't appreciate it. Because what they do is they'll flip the script and they will attack you, and then you'll be involved in this drama karmic triangle where they become the victim all of a sudden. And they persecute you. And as narcissists do, they put out a campaign against you where they are now the victim and you're now seen as the villain. We've seen it too well. It's time for you to heal. It's time for you to recover. Or if you're not going to repeat it, your next generation, your children and your grandchildren are going to repeat it. Generational cycles of abuse, of traumatic abuse. It's time for you to heal and stop staying or remaining stuck. And I know sometimes it's difficult, because believe me, I've been through the similar situation, but guess what? It's more detrimental to remain stuck. It's more dangerous to remain unchanged. Just want to thank you for joining me this morning. Kaz is saying superb.
Of this level of ego I've wanted to live for too long.
Anise has enjoyed the show this morning. Thank you for joining me. Anise has said it's a great show. Thank you for joining me this morning. Get your healing. Repeat or recover. I'm going to share some books on the link where you can actually get some help. You can actually get my book. I wrote it a couple of years ago when I was experiencing my trauma. It's called Finally in Love with Yourself. It's on Amazon. You can get that book. I'll put it on the link. And I'll put other books on the link that you can get your help and your support. Reach out. Brothers in the community. People outside. Globally. Reach out. Reach out. Kaz has mentioned You brought me to tears.
I'm living 1,000
Many
days.
blessings, Kaz.
I'm living
I'm talking from the
1,000
heart.
days.
Believe me.
Who I really am as love. I'm saying it.
Many blessings to you this morning. Thank you for joining me this morning. Get the healing that you need and recover. Recover and breathe again. Get the support you need. And I'm happy to say that I'm happy with me. I've recovered despite external dramas. I've recovered. I love myself. I accept myself. I respect myself. And I've got a lovely partner that equally respects me and has also done the work. Very important for you to do the work this morning. Reach out. I'm a life coach. Reach out.
Into the present moment to be born again. Birthing I am enough into every corner.
Many blessings this Sunday. Have a great Sunday.
Feeling an innocence towards my dreams.
Many blessings.
Free from the taunt of past.
Have a great Sunday. Many blessings.
And love, passions, and business. My expectations
many
are
blessings.
Purified. My hope
See you
is
next
so
week.
pure. I'm feeling